have an obligation as citizens of this country to acknowledge the wrongs that have been done and to make steps to correct them.
There are opportunities for us to ask lots of questions, get curious.
I think part of it is to understand our own bias or our own understanding first.
You could see the hurt and the pain that a lot of the community members felt, but then also you could see the hope and smiles and joy.
There was a long-standing disconnect between the Semiahmoo First Nations and the school.
We're only a few steps into the journey.
Not going to happen all at once.
You know, we're seeing more and more of that ask and that need in this era of reconciliation. So as we unravel that, it will just get better and better and better.
But like anything else, real change and real success in change takes time.
So we're located here on the north side of the 49th parallel. We're one of the few transboundary communities here in the lower mainland. We currently just broke 100 community members, registered community members in Semiahmoo. And we live in one of the most beautiful parts of the world. We as Semiahmoo, we are what's known as in our territory as Slaktamish. We are survivors of the flood. Our origin in this area comes back to where we settled once the flood was receded, and once we settled in this territory, given the abundance and the beauty and the pristinity of the pristine area that we live in. So we settled here after the flood, and we've been here in the area of 10 to 12,000 years. So I've heard many different translations of our name, Semiahmoo, and the one I've heard hole in the sky. You know, there's one that goes around and talks about Half Moon Bay.
Yeah.
That's not correct from my understanding, and it's troubling because it was one of our elders that said that. And because Semi being half or that crescent shape, you know, one of the translations that I was given was Semiahmoo, which was lower. Semi talks about lowering, and ma is the way a mother feeds her daughter or her child. So it talks about lowering to feed. So when you talk of how far the shore goes out here, how far the tide goes out, we always have a phrase that when the tide goes out, the table is set. And really, when we settled in this territory after the flood, we settled in this area because of the abundance that this bay gave us, through shellfishing, through salmon, through the harvesting we could do in the ancient forests that were in this area. But we, you know, that was the one that kind of stuck with me.
When I first joined Surrey School District, actually, our deputy superintendent, Mr. Holland, and I were driving around South Surrey, and it was one of the first things he shared with me was what had happened to the Semiahmoo Nation and how we had taken their name without permission. And of course it was a different time, but since then they had let us know that the harm it had done to them and the importance of a name. So we've had lots of conversations about how would we actually restore that process.
I had an opportunity to do after that was to actually meet some of the Semiahmoo First Nations elders, specifically Joanne Charles, on Semiahmoo First Nations land, which is down just on the beach there. And really, that was I wouldn't say that was a turning point for me, but in some ways, I really started to understand some of the injustices that were done to the Semiahmoo First Nations inadvertently through the Semiahmoo and the Surrey School District. I see.
And we have a long list of historical wrongs that we've committed as a nation, and I think that denying that does not help. Acting like those things didn't happen does not help. You need to love this place, warts and all, and work to make it better.
Them giving us the right to use Semiahmoo as our name, they're so welcoming and open and kind and wonderful, and wanting to move forward. So that's what I would say to people that were maybe hesitant of connecting with the Semiahmoo First Nations, whether that's Semiahmoo Minor Hockey League or whatever the case may be that's using that name, just to say, look, it's not about necessarily, yes, we want to apologize and we want to have reconciliation in the community, but what we get out of it through that reconciliation, it's not a one-way street, it's a two-way street, and there's a lot of richness that can be gained from connecting with the Semiahmoo First Nations.
You know, when we speak of reconciliation, I think there's many layers to it. There's many layers to it, and I think one is just opening that dialogue, learning and understanding I'll say the true history of this bay, the true history of the Semiahmoo people, and the trials and tribulations that we've overcome. You know, and I think it's just supporting Indigenous initiatives and supporting the nation in the direction and the future that we hope to build here in our territory, whether that's economically, culturally, or politically. And how do we do that? You know, it is being able to sit down and have a coffee, being able to sit down and open your mind and open your heart to a different perspective. And that different perspective may be challenging, but that's okay. Well, I think one of the big issues that I had when I came into leadership was we didn't have a very big voice here in our territory. And myself over the past few years, and our leadership that's been over the years, has really put a lot of effort into gaining that recognition here in our territory, both municipally, provincially, and federally, to acknowledge that this is our home and we're still here and we're not going anywhere. If anything, we're growing and we're expanding, we're blossoming. You know, I think the misrepresentation that's happened is because we were such a small community for so long, in essence, we were kind of forgotten about. And over the years, we've done a lot of work to build our name and build our existence here in Semiahmoo Bay.
I know, talking to some Semiahmoo carvers and artists, that one of the issues with the idea of the totem as a mascot is that the Semiahmoo people didn't carve totems. They carved, house posts and welcome posts, but they didn't carve totems. And so it was kind of, an example of misrepresentation plus also appropriation of First Nations imagery that doesn't actually belong even to the Semiahmoo people. And so the idea of a totem, and even some of the early images of the totem, were Haida inspired, which is the North Coast, and we're in South Coast. And so I think that's part of the issue. Plus it's also the totem itself is something that's important within a community. And so it not only affected the Semiahmoo people, but it was people groups that do carve totems. I think it was inappropriate that way.
We lost an opportunity to really build students up and have them be proud of who they were. Whether they were Semiahmoo First Nations or not, be proud to be Indigenous students in the school. So that, to be honest, in my opinion, greatly affected people coming through this building.
The school community is interesting because I had a meeting a couple months ago with the student council president from the grad class of 1964. And he was confused and a little hurt and upset that we were changing the mascot from the totems to the Thunderbirds. And he's like, we brought that in because, and I said, I respect, again, these are people, and some of the signage, kids have made beautiful pieces of art for the school that say Semi. Did they do that because they wanted to be disrespectful? No, they did that because they love this place. They loved their time here, and they have so many positive connections that they want to celebrate those. So having those conversations and having to figure out how to navigate being respectful, and as I said, knowing better and doing better.
It's definitely put a dark cloud over, to be frank, over the Semiahmoo High School. Taking things like shortening of the name to Semi, using of the mascot of a totem, has indirectly impacted a lot of the members of the community. Whether we take ownership of that or not, it's still the reality, right? So, with the process of having an apology reconciliation ceremony this past year, we want to move forward with the right intentions and the right relationship, right? Because there has been a massive impact, and being a part of that ceremony, you could see the hurt and the pain that a lot of the community members felt, but then also you could see the hope and smiles and joy that was coming from an event and a participation in a ceremony like that. It really brought them a lot of optimism, I think, in what we could look forward to in the future.
We often come with our own biases and our own lived experience that sometimes can create misrepresentation. Sometimes it's by accident. Sometimes it's by not understanding or being culturally sensitive to different ways of being and who we are as human beings. I think that when we talk about misrepresentation, again, it comes back to really taking the time to get to know people, getting to know their backgrounds, getting to know who they are, where they come from, how they learn, what excites them, what values they hold, what's important for people. So I think that's how we get past misrepresentation, but have
This process has been started on a few different occasions with a few different groups, and then it's sort of lost momentum, and then it's fallen off the side of people's desks, and they haven't really put the emphasis or the importance on it.
I think it's a learning curve. Really, I think, and I think the other thing too is that because Semiahmoo Secondary is such an old school in the area, that it was a little bit set in its ways, and really being able to open that dialogue of change and of respect and of honor to the nation. That's really where it began. And through some of those conversations, early conversations that I'd had, it was just that. It's beginning to unravel some of the historical discussions.
I think we've come a long way, especially since I was in high school, where we talked a lot about Indigenous communities in the past tense, as communities of the past. Of people that have faded away or disappeared. And we now know and understand that that's not true, that those communities are vibrant. But we also have a long way to go to understanding. So it's complex. So I don't think it's like an overnight, like just reconciliation is a step, like the first stepping stone. And I like to think of it as like stones crossing a river, that we're kind of going from stone to stone to stone, and that as long as we're moving across the river, we're doing okay. It's going to take time.
Well, Semiahmoo is the bay. Semiahmoo was the bay. Semiahmoo is us, is the people. So we had done some work in the past in discussions with the province just around protecting of our name. But because it's a place name and it's the name of the bay, we were unable to protect that name. It is. over the years, we've never had much of a relationship with Semiahmoo Secondary. So as we've grown together and as we began to develop that relationship, it's been an opportunity to explain to the district, explain to the school why it's important that the full name is used as Semiahmoo, and our understanding of what the translation of that name means and how we share that. We spoke of several different things, motifs, emblems that would represent the school, and the school really liked Thunderbirds, and I really like the Thunderbirds. Thunderbird is a very obviously a mythical. I don't want to say mythical. It's an ancient creature from our territory, and being able to have a respectful, culturally appropriate symbol at the school is important. So it was a bit of a process again, but I think it was just consensus between the nation and the school to say the Thunderbirds is an appropriate logo for the school.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the young people that are coming through the schools, they're going to have a very different perspective of Indigenous communities and the struggles and the triumphs that we have, because they're learning a very different history than maybe their parents or their grandparents heard or learnt in this area. So it is a good process. In my eyes, it's just the beginning.
I think we are less far in than we have to go. Like, we're only a few steps into the journey, I think. We've begun it. I think we really are on the path to integrating First Peoples principles into our curriculum. But I think it could be so much more integrated than it is now. So we're sort of, I'm not going to say just at the beginning, but we're really still in the early stages. What's important is that we're starting to build momentum, I think, and that we maintain the momentum going forward and actually increase the pace by which we indigenize our curriculum.
Well, we're making strides, but it's a long process. It's not going to happen all at once. It takes time for people to learn and have the background to be able to teach the materials. It takes a long time for society to change, and it takes a long time to develop the resources in the library. It's still taking time to find books that are by First Nations authors that speak to First Nation students, because they're just finding their voice and they're just beginning to gain confidence.
I always equate it to hopping in a canoe together. We've all hopped in the same canoe, and some people don't know how to paddle. Some people are, sightseeing and looking off at the birds in the sky. But really being able to find that unison and that working together to work in the same direction.
Yeah, the Moose Hide campaign is a campaign, on the Highway of Tears, which there's been the vast majority of women that have gone missing on the Highway of Tears are Indigenous women and girls, and the Lacerte family hunts moose in this particular area, and a bunch of years ago, when they went up and got a moose, they decided to dry that hide and cut up into little squares and wear the squares in order to bring awareness to what's going on, because these women have largely been forgotten. So the Moose Hide campaign, to wear that moose hide patch, really what you want people to say is, and it's happened to me when I've been wearing it, they say, what's on your shirt or what's on your jacket? And then that gives you an opportunity to explain what this is. We want to, as a man and a woman or anyone, you're making a commitment to end violence against women and girls, Indigenous and otherwise.
Other campaigns that we've done and that's expanded to across the country is things like Orange Shirt Day. National Indigenous Peoples Day was just on Tuesday as well, June 21st. And then next year in September, along with Orange Shirt Day, there's actually going to be I want to say it's like a reconciliation day, where students actually won't be in attendance, and it's actually a day to acknowledge what has gone on in residential schools and things like that, and to bring further awareness into the kind of reconciliation process for Canadians and Indigenous peoples, across the country and around the globe. So.
Until I can successfully say that every student who walks through Surrey School District's doors appreciates and understands diversity and inclusion, appreciates and understands why we have a Truth and Reconciliation report, appreciates and understands the what's different for Indigenous learners, and why we really need to address the misinformation that was out there for so many years. But I want to know that that happens for every single kid that comes through our doors.